from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Each year, an estimated 100,000 people visit the West Virginia State Museum and Culture Center in Charleston. In an effort to inspire, educate, and enrich, the center showcases the state's history, culture, and art, and hosts a variety of festivals and other events. It's also home to West Virginia Public Broadcasting's internationally acclaimed radio show, Mountain Stage. The center is overseen by the West Virginia Division of Culture and History, which is dedicated to the preservation, protection, and promotion of the state's heritage. In addition to locating and gathering objects, documents, and other archival materials, the division identifies and cares for historically significant structures and sites around the state, forging ahead in its effort to preserve West Virginia's story.
We only have one past, and when it's gone, there's no way of recovering it. So we need to be as capable and as devoted stewards of the past as possible. The history belongs to everyone, and so we really strive to preserve it for everyone.
Scattered across West Virginia, often just under the surface, evidence exists of communities and times gone by.
See these spikes? There's something there.
This is indeed true in Marshall County, at the Grave Creek Mound Archaeological Complex, right beside the site of the first known archaeological dig in the state.
My name is Alex Corkum. I'm a PhD student at the University of Bradford in England. We're doing a geophysical survey, ground-penetrating radar, and earth resistivity tomography. And the objective is to find archaeological features. We're looking for anomalous material under the ground.
In deviating from what is expected, Corkum and his colleagues aren't looking for artifacts. Today they're looking for something a bit bigger, a moat, in fact.
There's a moat which was identified in 1975 which encircles the mound. Our objective, at least with the ground-penetrating radar, is to identify that moat and be able to more accurately map it. The earth resistivity tomography, we're looking for larger features within the mound itself, so any of the shafts that were dug into it, any of the tombs which may exist, any undocumented archaeological features, that sort of thing, but on a larger scale than artifact.
Jeremy Kohus oversees the Grave Creek Mound Archaeological Complex and appreciates such a non-invasive approach to the study of human activity here.
This is the safest and most non-destructive way we can see what, if anything, is still inside the mound.
Jamie Davis is Director of Global Information Systems for Ohio Valley Archaeology, Incorporated.
200 feet altitude.
Davis is using a drone to capture still images of the mound and generate data to produce a very accurate three-dimensional model for use in Corkum's study, a process known as photogrammetry. The Grave Creek Mound measures about 60 feet high and 240 feet in diameter. It took about 3 million basket loads of soil to build the imposing conical mass by hand. In 1909, the property was purchased by the state of West Virginia, which opened a museum here in 1952. The current museum opened in 1979 and is named in honor of archaeologist, historian, and Marshall County native Delph Nerona. The large brick building with its pyramid-shaped skylights serves as an architectural tribute to prehistoric times.
The Grave Creek Mound is the second largest Adena mound in the world. It is also the namesake of the town of Moundsville. That, along with other mounds in the area, most of which have been plowed over in the past 100 to 200 years. The Grave Creek Mound is one of the largest that is left.
A tributary of the Ohio River, Grave Creek existed long before the Grave Creek Mound and the graves found inside. Nevertheless, it is the Native American burial site, rather than the nearby stream, that stands out in Moundsville, at the base of West Virginia's northern panhandle. Designated a National Historic Landmark in July 1964, the impressive earthen mass stands as a testament to a significant group of prehistoric Native Americans who survived by hunting, gathering, and growing domesticated plants. Andrea Keller is the complex's cultural program coordinator.
The people who built the mound, archaeologists call them the Adena people. We do not know what they would have called themselves because the mound was built about 250 to 150 BC, so over 2,000 years ago. There is no language that has been passed down for that far back.
In 1901, a mound was excavated on the property of Ohio Governor Thomas Worthington, who called his estate Adena. It's a Hebrew word referring to places remarkable for the delightfulness of their situation.
And because that was the first really thorough documented excavation of that particular group of people, then that culture got named the Adena people.
Traveling and trading as far south as the Gulf Coast, the Adena people flourished in the Ohio River Valley.
They would have been fairly settled. They would have been building permanent, smaller houses. They also would have had gardens. They were kind of at the beginning of learning how to really do horticulture. You also find pottery. When you're a nomadic person, you're not going to have pottery because it's heavy and breaks easily. However, once you're settled down, it can be very handy because you can cook directly in it. You can store things. Clay can be found just about anywhere.
In 1770, long after the Adena were here, Joseph Tomlinson of Maryland cleared the land and with the help of his brother Samuel, built a small cabin nearby.
One day, Joseph came back from hunting and came across this very odd hill.
After ascending to the top, he determined that it was man-made and likely used by Native Americans as a burial site.
And they must have been very educated because they realized it was not an ordinary hill, it was in fact a burial mound.
In 1775, after visiting this and other area mounds, a Revolutionary soldier noted, quote, "The Indians' tradition is that there was a great battle fought here and many great warriors killed. These mounds were raised to perpetuate their memory," close quote. The manner in which the Grave Creek Mound was constructed suggested that one mound was built upon another quite some time after the first. In honor of the mound's builders, Joseph Tomlinson refused requests to excavate the mound. However, in 1838, 13 years after Joseph's death, a relative, Abelard Tomlinson, and his brother-in-law Thomas Biggs received permission to open the earthen structure.
They were probably hoping to find many interesting artifacts in such a big monument. So with high hopes, they started digging a tunnel into the mound. Towards the center of the mound, they found a hollow area that had rotted wood in it and the remains of two individuals. And that's what we call the lower tomb. One individual had no artifacts, and the other individual had some beads and a stone with holes drilled into it. That may have been an ornament, or it may have been a weight for a spear thrower.
Hoping to establish the site as a profitable tourist attraction, Tomlinson and Biggs would construct a staircase leading visitors along a bricked passageway connected to a building atop the mound.
They ended up digging a shaft up and down the middle of the mound, and that's when they discovered the upper tomb.
While it held the remains of only one individual, there were more artifacts here than in the lower tomb.
There were many, many shell beads. There were also ornaments made out of a stone called mica, which would be kind of the prehistoric equivalent of sequins. The individual also had copper bracelets, and they would have been very expensive imported items back then.
Before long, 20 candles lit the contents of the lower tomb with its newly expanded walls and paved floor.
Descriptions say they had brick walls in it, and they were displaying the human remains, which museums nowadays would not do that, and artifacts from Grave Creek, but also from elsewhere. So the very first museum on our property was actually inside the mound.
Keller says the individual's bones and much of what was excavated and placed on display by the family in 1839 has been lost to time.
They were not trained archaeologists. They didn't have the knowledge or the technical ability to record everything in as much detail that an archaeologist today would.
In the 1880s, the Smithsonian Institution sent archaeologists to explore and excavate mounds and earthworks along the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. More than 400 prehistoric mounds, many in clusters, were documented in West Virginia. About 100 were found in the Kanawha River Valley, constructed of earth, stone, or both. In South Charleston, excavation of what is now the state's second largest mound revealed a log tomb and a skeleton laid on sheets of copper and surrounded by the remains of 10 other people. While most Adena were cremated, there were men and women, perhaps chiefs, shamans, or other people of high social standing, buried similarly. Today, relatively little remains of the mound builders' culture in West Virginia.
It seems like mounds and earthworks tended to be built in areas that also were favored by industrial development, and even earlier than that, agriculture. And as a result, unfortunately, a lot of the earthworks in the Kanawha Valley here in Moundsville, and pretty much wherever there were earthworks throughout the United States, have been dug up or plowed down or just have disappeared. So when we do have a preserved mound, it really is a treasure to have. And it's very, very important to preserve what we do have left.
As tools and techniques employed in archaeological digs evolved, professionals and amateurs worked together with museums, universities, and others to conduct large-scale investigations and excavations around the state, particularly in the 1960s. Archaeologist Hank D. Lutton serves as curator at the Grave Creek Mound Archaeological Complex.
The 1960s were really the golden age of archaeology in West Virginia. In a very short time, some of the most iconic archaeological sites were excavated, and the number of recorded sites dramatically increased. So for instance, in a 4-year period from 1960 to 1964, the number of recorded sites in West Virginia actually doubled.
We have other sites further west where you pick.
This was due in part to Edward V. McMichael, who served as the first state archaeologist overseeing the West Virginia Geological and Economic Survey's new archaeology section.
One of Edward McMichael's great contributions is that he directed his activities and those of his cohorts across the state, so there was a much more even distribution geographically and also temporally. So where there were gaps in the archaeological record, these sites began to fill those chronologies in and produce a much better and a more comprehensive understanding of West Virginia's past.
Dr. McMichael, who were these people?
In 1964, WSAZ-TV's Boz Johnson interviewed McMichael during an excavation along the Kanawha River near Buffalo in Putnam County.
From a scientific standpoint, what's the significance of your work here, Dr. McMichael?
Well, first, we're amassing one of the largest series of physical remains, the human skeletons, that's been done in modern archaeology in the eastern United States. And this will be quite a scientific discovery, as well as learning what a village plan of one of these typical towns, of which we have many in the state, is like. We've learned that there's first a big central plaza, which is apparently a ceremonial area. Then there were large ceremonial buildings surrounding that, and regular houses, not your teepees of the American movies, but pretty substantial rectangular houses with thatched roofs. And finally a big palisade surrounded the whole thing, for it was sort of a fortified town.
And then this is the burial ground.
Yeah, well, it's also a village area too, so they were just burying right in the village, and especially right around the edge of this big plaza.
Excavations revealed that at least 4 Native American villages occupied the location at one time or another. The site is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
I'm rehousing all these old collections from the 60s and 70s and putting them into today's standards. So,
lead curator Heather Klein oversees the West Virginia Archaeological Research and Collections Management Facility, which opened at the Grave Creek Mound Archaeological Complex in 2008. The facility can house all of the state's historic and prehistoric artifacts, including this box and hundreds more from the Buffalo Dig. Klein says McMichael's impact on our understanding of the state's archaeological history is incomparable.
The amount of work that he did while he was here, which was a very short amount of time, it's amazing, and he collected a massive amount of artifacts, specifically ceramics. There were thousands, just thousands of historic ceramics, thousands of pieces of debitage, because they were opening up large areas with bulldozers, trying to collect as much as they could at that time.
It took 2 curators and about 2 years to rehouse the Buffalo collection, even with the help of 16-year-old volunteer Jared Yoakum, a student at John Marshall High School.
I've always wanted to be an archaeologist since I was a little kid. One of my first projects here when I started volunteering in the archaeological lab was artifacts from the Buffalo site. I would wash them or label them so that they could be cataloged and reboxed. When I got them, they were in Ziploc bags. They had already been moved once, or they were in paper bags. And so I would take them out. If they needed washed, wash them or label them, and then they could be permanently rehoused in the archives.
Klein spends most of her days rehousing materials from such digs as the one at Buffalo, dating back to the 1960s.
At that time, there really wasn't a standard for curation. After they came out of the field, not much was being done with artifacts besides just a general cataloging, and then a report would hopefully be written up about them. So after that, they were kind of just put in boxes and stored away. So right now, we're trying to go through and see exactly what we have here so that they'll be conserved for future researchers.
Today, Klein is sorting prehistoric ceramics from a site in Marshall County.
These are all actually rim sherds. So these came from the top part of the pottery pot. Some of them are shell tempered, which are like these ceramics here. Prehistoric pottery fragment. You can see the little white flecks are actually shell, so that would have been shell from the river. Some of them are limestone tempered, which are like these here, which some of them you can see the limestone actually peeking out from their clay mixture. They helped strengthen the pot when it was going to be fired in the fire. This is actually clay tempered ceramic that has cord marking on the surface. Some of them are also from what we call grog tempering, which is another type of way that they tempered their ceramics. So this is how we want everything to look in the end. This is everything rehoused.
While she may not see all of the artifacts rehoused in her lifetime, Klein remains undaunted, taking it one box at a time. Like fellow archaeologists, she's driven by an acute sense of curiosity and wonder.
One of the main reasons I really like my job is because I can do so many different things. I'm not doing the same thing every day.
On one particular day in October, Klein joins fellow staffers and various presenters in welcoming visitors during the complex's annual celebration of Archaeology Month. In addition to a behind-the-scenes tour of the Archaeological Research and Collections Management Facility, visitors participate in hands-on, family-oriented activities, such as spear throwing.
Take it back a little bit and just... This was heat treated just as you have it here.
Flint napper Bob Walden of Kanawha County demonstrates the art of chipping a stone into tools, a process used to make some of the artifacts on display here.
Several of the points that I've made here that are on display are of the Adena blade that they used as a flint knife. There's a handle on it because when the archaeologists find the stone tools, they don't find them with the perishable wood and sinew that held them together as a tool. So this makes what we have on display here more understandable, especially to young people.
After 50 years of studying archaeology and history, Walden says there is still plenty to discover.
I have a passion to learn about people that have lived long before us and how they were able to survive, how they ate, how their culture worked when their society collapsed, what might have caused that, so that in our future we may not repeat the mistakes that were made in the past.
Curator Hank Letton hopes that more recent errors may be avoided as well. He says it was common in the 1960s to use bulldozers to strip away the top of what archaeologists call the plow zone.
The plow zone's that area that's been disturbed by previous tillings of the land to plant crops. Now, archaeologists would sample that soil because the tilling would pull up artifacts from the features and the layers.
Novices, he adds, often performed much of the work on large-scale excavations.
Having someone who may not be a devoted, skilled archaeologist working to recover human remains in a casual manner isn't something that would pass muster today.
Lutton says Congress passed the far-reaching National Historic Preservation Act in 1966 to avoid repeating such mistakes and to preserve historical and archaeological sites throughout the United States.
That legislation, along with subsequent bills and requirements, both at a federal level and at state levels, really begins to set up a framework where we need professional archaeologists and rely upon their expertise. It's also other preservationists, architects, people who can assess our resources, whether they're above the ground or below it or natural resources.
The National Historic Preservation Act facilitated the institution of the National Register of Historic Places, such as the Grave Creek Mound, which was added in October 1966. The law also brought about the establishment of state historic preservation offices, such as the one overseen by the West Virginia Division of Culture and History. Site manager Jeremy Kohus believes everyone needs to learn about their heritage.
We offer people in this area a chance to learn something about where they're from, their history, their namesake. This has been in the area and under one family's guidance since the 1700s, since it was found until it was turned over to the state. And now we protect it here and we try to educate the public on why it's here. We're a free state public museum. We don't charge admission. Our goal is to get as many people in here as possible, and that's what we do. And people learn a lot more than when they came in. That's our ultimate goal.
To learn more about historic preservation, visit the West Virginia Division of Culture and History on the web at wvculture.org.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.